In terms of scope of procurement, procurement covers all actions required to obtain goods and services on behalf of any organization from external third-party suppliers. In other words, procurement should influence all activities of the organization as long as there is obtaining of goods and services on behalf of the organization from any third party. So the organizational procurement policy will provide guidelines on how to procure. So every organization has what is called an organizational procurement policy, which defines how procurement has to be done in that organization. So this procurement policy will focus on clarifying what is the role of the procurement team, what is the role of the end user, it to clarify what are the expectations from an ethical perspective, it to clarify what are the expectations before you obtain goods, what do you need to do you need to raise a requisition, etc., etc. So the procurement policy will give guidelines in terms of the full scope of procurement and what are the different expectations from every member within the organization. Okay, so procurement policy, the other role of procurement policy is to help everyone within the organization understand what are the expectations when we are procuring goods and services for the particular organization. Then it also ensures the 5 Rs of procurement. It guides in terms of the quality, quantity, price, the right time and right place, and the delivery that is required. The procurement policy also ensures that there is value for money in any procurements that are going to be conducted for that organization. And then it also helps in terms of minimizing the cost, the actual cost of procuring. And then it also helps to guide in terms of supplier relationship management, which we have spoken about in terms of supplier relationships. And then the procurement policy also helps us in terms of good ethics. It clarifies in terms of what is morally right and what is morally expected from our procurement initiatives and activities. It also helps in terms of reducing risk, like I've spoken about. As we are doing contracts with suppliers, we are actually reducing the risk of anything that might go wrong as the procurement team. And we are making sure that the organization is protected from that through a contract document that we sign with the suppliers. And then it also helps us in terms of compliance. What are the expectations from a legal regulatory perspective? If you are subscribed to EU, what is the EU procurement directives that are required from the Cabinet Office, etc., etc. So that's essentially what a procurement policy does. So it is very key that we follow the procurement policy wherever we are procuring because of all these benefits. Kindly move to the next slide, Chair. Negotiation is a component which brings value addition to the procurement policy. So in terms of the processes that are required from a negotiation perspective, the first step is preparation. So arguably, this is the most important step of any negotiation. When you are preparing for a negotiation, there are so many things that you need to focus on, or so many things that you are expected to get to know. You need to research in terms of your audience. Who are you going to be meeting with? If you are meeting with the supplying organization, what are their titles? What are their responsibilities within the organization? You also need to research in terms of how many people are coming. You need to research in terms of what is the most appropriate way of sitting in terms of preparing for sitting arrangement, because you need not to have a we and them when you are sitting on a negotiating table where the supplying organization are occupying the right side and the buying organization is occupying the left side. So it would be good to also have an understanding or a preparation or a plan of how you're going to be sitting on that negotiation table. And then you also need to prepare in terms of how you're going to open the negotiation. You need to prepare in terms of what is your walkaway position. You need to prepare in terms of what is the starting point of you. If you are going to be negotiating between the buying organization, you have the procurement colleagues, maybe, and the technical colleagues. You need to split yourselves. Who is going to be negotiating on what? Who's going to be starting, etc., etc. So then, in next stage will be opening. So opening is when you meet with the supplying organization, and you also need to plan in terms of opening. The questions that you're going to be asking on opening a negotiation session are very key, and they actually are the most important questions because they are going to be helping you refine your approach or flex the way you're going to be doing it. I'll give an example. There was a time when we were negotiating for some chemicals, and we really wanted the suppliers to come down on those chemicals. And one of the things that we would do is, one of the questions that we agreed we're going to be asking them is, what is the size of your organization? As an opening question. They will tell you, oh, it's actually $1 billion. And you'll be like, so, okay, you already now calculating that our spend with this supplier is actually 900 million. So if they are telling us that their total spend is 1 billion, it means we are occupying 90% of their interests. So that essentially means that we have greater bargaining power over them. So when we are now conducting the negotiation, you already know where you stand in terms of negotiation power and the bargaining power of you as a buyer. So definitely that is very key. What are you going to ask? We should move away from asking, how are your children? How is home? How is family? How is COVID? No, ask a question that are a bit relevant to the negotiation table that will help you even refine better your negotiation. And then testing. This stage is where parties try and understand what is really important to each other and where concessions could be made. Effective communication is very important at this stage. So basically, listening is very key even at the testing stage. You need to listen well to the supplying organization. Listen to what they are saying more. It will actually give you a view in terms of how do you move on to the next question, etc., etc. And then the next one is proposing. You then propose what is your starting position. So when you're going to the negotiation table, like I clearly mentioned, you need to propose not your walk-away position. You need to start from a bit far. And also, one of the things that you need to do is you need to be making small strides. For example, if you are negotiating for something that you are willing to pay $60 US, you can actually start from something like 40, and then you'll be increasing bit by bit. You don't make huge strides to move by every $10. No, that will be inappropriate and it will not give you the best negotiation outcome. But you need to make small strides so that you achieve your negotiation objective and outcome. So bargaining, this is where each party offers to give up something in return for something. So like, we are not negotiating on a win-lose situation. That is not the best outcome that you would want, or a lose-win situation where one party is celebrating, but the other party is not okay. We need to aim for a win-win situation. In other words, when you're going to a negotiation table, you need to know that you should be expected to actually give out something to the other party so that you also maintain the win-win position. So if one party has to give up something, you both need to give a concession, and then you move on to the agreement. Once bargaining has been completed, it is expected that an agreement can be made. So after any negotiation, even if the contract is not yet ready for sign-off, you need to write minutes to the party so that no information is lost with forgetting. So you need to write a summary of the discussion and tabulate what have been agreed, so that at least even if while you are drafting the contract already, you have a position that has been documented between the two parties where you can actually check what did we agree, by the way. So that's very key and important. And then as you are drafting the agreement after a negotiation, also like I've indicated earlier on, try to cover everything that might go wrong in that discussion. So everything that might go wrong, make sure that you put it into the agreement, and we have ways of mitigating it so that we prevent rather than cure any challenges that we have. And then on negotiation, then the closure, this stage includes documentation of what everything that has been agreed and contracting. So one of the challenges that had been put across by the team that had put some questions was we normally have poor approach or tactics. So one way you can actually deal with this is to make sure that you prepare well, number one. Number two, you research on your audience. Number two, tactful opening, ask the right questions. And then the next one, when making concessions, make small steps, not big jumps. And then have a walk away position, what that is called partner. Do not be in a rush to conclude. Don't show the supplier your desperateness to conclude a deal. Tell them, it's fine, you can go and think about it. If you show them your desperateness, they will then utilize that to their favor and advantage, and you might actually lose on any potential good deal. And then listen a lot than talking too much. Do not give away too much information as you are on a negotiation table. And then tactful seating arrangement, do not promote us and them. And then one other person would say negotiation takes time. It takes time if you did not prepare very well. Have a structured approach with some flexibility, of course. Also do a cost benefit analysis, the Pareto principle or the Kraujic matrix principle. You cannot negotiate on everything that you are buying on. You can decide to only negotiate on the strategic items, those ones that take up 80% of value, but only 20%, and also the strategic items, those ones that have high risk and high cost to the organization. And then there is someone who also mentioned something to do with the policy. So whenever you are doing your negotiation, make sure that you are negotiating within the policy guidelines. We cannot compromise policy guidelines as we are negotiating. And then the challenge of different interests. So yes, there is different interest between the buying organization and the supplying organization, which is the reason why we are getting into the negotiation table. We are trying to resolve that conflict that is currently there between your expectations and the expectations of the supplying organization. So be tactful and gather facts before the actual negotiation.
One of the critical aspects in negotiations is understanding why are we negotiating in the first place. What KPIs are a priority to the organization. And you get that by first getting what we call an internal approval. That internal approval is going to shape our priorities. Either the priority is price or the priority is security of supply. So the organization it wants to achieve. So to answer that question, Hemant, is first get the approval within the organization, ensure that the procurement negotiation strategy is in line with the corporate strategy. That's very key. The organization may be looking for a long-term solution, and the procurement person goes for negotiation for a short-term solution. That compromises price and security, because the organization is looking for security in supply, and the procurement person is looking for short-term gains through price chiseling or whatever it is. So it is critical to have the strategy upfront. Is the procurement strategy in line with the corporate strategy? Are the KPIs clearly defined before we go and negotiate with suppliers for whatever reason you are negotiating for?
Balancing security of supply versus price. I think one of the important things to do here is to really seek to understand those components of price. What is driving the price? What are the main drivers? And I saw there's a question in the Q&A as well about how do you ensure when you are negotiating that you are not cheating, you know, the farmers don't feel cheated. I think that as much as you as a procurement, as a buyer can understand what is driving the price, that will determine how to address that. So I think, you know, and that information comes through good supplier relationships. If you have that, suppliers will be more likely to share with you their, sometimes even their cost structure. Also relationships with other buying organizations as well, or you might find some industry associations or things like that that can provide some information on price drivers. And I would say, like, once that is understood, then we can now address certain issues like within the contract to say, okay, I don't want to overpay, but I also want to make sure my suppliers aren't going out of business, right? So if the price drivers are things like maybe more external macro things like tax regimes or even Forex, what can I include in my contract? So it could be things like escalation clauses, or if inflation is, you know, very high, revision to the contract, maybe on an annual basis if it's a long-term contract. You could have things like that. I think the other thing that is used quite often in unpredictable situations is reimbursable cost structures as well. Instead of, you know, always going for fixed price where you only have, you know, you just agree a price with the supplier and that's all you're going to pay them. it's maybe looking at, can some of the elements be reimbursable, where the supplier will buy the product and show me the receipts or whatever, you know, to demonstrate the price that they paid for it, and then I will add a fixed percentage or of a margin for them for their profits and overheads. So I think there are many mechanisms to make sure that we're paying the right price, not under or over, but the mechanism that we choose really depends on what is driving the price of the goods or services that we're buying.
I'm just going to read all these questions. Very insightful presentations. What is your recommendations on strategies for procurement to reducing costs, especially unstable macroeconomic environments such as Zimbabwe, where there are various price regimes? I think you've just covered some of that. And maybe the next one, we could field this question on negotiation, especially when procuring from smallholder farmers. How do you ensure that negotiations are fair and ensure that farmers don't feel cheated? Ronald, maybe you want to take that?
Thank you. I also wanted to comment on the first one, over and above what Momola has said. Yeah. Probably in the context of the question, the first question, some of the strategies that you can look at is understand what are the cost drivers. In this case, I think the suppliers are worried about the replacement cost, the replacement value of their goods and services. So in that process, you can then work with your finance people, either you come up with favorable payment terms, but those are the things that can actually drive cost up. Suppliers in this environment, they charge speculative prices. They are worried about what will be the value of my goods in 30 days' time compared to the value of my goods today. So we need to give that balancing act very well and work closely with your finance people to balance your cash flows as well. The other strategy that you may also look at is the issue around consortium buying. How many players are there in industry, in your particular industry, and which are those things that you compete on? I don't think you compete on stock food or stock feed. I don't think you compete on those elements. So you can come together if, let's say we are 10 or whatever it is, consolidate your requirements, go to one supplier and then negotiate either your quantity discounts, because then you've got a high leverage with that customer. And you can even start working on your warehouses, your consolidated warehouses. If really we are 10 in that space and you are not competing on those particular items, you set up your warehouse, you buy your own stuff, you stock. That is done as a long-term strategy, working together with your finance to make sure that is it a viable decision. Okay. The last question, suppliers feel cheated. That's the problem with negotiations, because the strategy was not clear upfront. If the supplier is expecting a long-term deal and you use a long-term deal in your negotiations, but you know very well that you are looking for a short-term benefit. So that becomes an unethical practice in procurement. So be clear, if you're going for a long-term deal, which are those things that you are trying to build so that one party does not feel cheated? Things around trust, things around open sharing of information, things around your cost transparency, things around your shared pricing, your communication, because there are two dynamics. If you are going for a long-term strategy, these things must be there. But if you are going for a long-term, short-term strategy and you circumvent this whole process, the other part will feel cheated in that process. And I don't think it's the right posture from a procurement perspective. Be clear on your strategy upfront. Is it long-term? Is it short-term? What are the benefits of a short-term? What are the benefits of a long-term? Those issues are driven by your organization, not procurement people. We can influence that process, but it's an organization that is driving that strategy.